I was just sitting here thinking the same thing I thought driving home from my advanced fiction class last night, that it's just an amazing thing about this job to be able to be in the company of writers as interested in the same minutia as I am, you know, and then just sit in the audience and learn more from them than I teach, you know, which is always the case of teaching. So I'm thrilled tonight to be here introducing Susan Wolter Nettell. I'm going to start with the details about Susan, which she sent me last year. She has been the recipient of the highly competitive, I will say, Minnesota Artist Initiative Grant in Prose, and she was selected as a member of the Loft Mentor Series in Poetry and Creative Prose, which was also a huge deal. She was my assistant editor for Waterstone Review, which was mostly a lot of work, but she was a fantastic assistant editor. Her writing credits include the Jonas Agee Award for Fiction in Dust and Fire, Writing and Art by Women, and Publication and Open to Interpretation, Intimate Landscape, a juried book competition of photographs, poetry, and prose. So, you know, even while Susan was in the program, she was kind of shaking things up out in the world, which was a great thing to see. When I encourage my current students to attend Colloquium, it's because I want them to hear how it is for fellow writers. The mini drafts, the challenges, the research, the disappointments, the detours, the arrivals, the passion for the project, and the perseverance for the work that will always be ahead, because you leave here and there's just a lot of work still ahead. I've had the pleasure of working with Susan for a number of years, first in my groundings in the craft class, where I think it's safe to say that everyone struggled to complete a single shining story. Was that not true? It was the struggle of the semester. So one thing that's also really cool is if you teach something like groundings and you see people, you know, just, you know, trying to wrestle the short story to the ground, and then you get to watch them go through the program, and then you have them advanced, and you have them in novel and all these other classes I had Susan in, and then you're in their thesis, and you're like, oh my God, you've learned how to do all of this, you know? And it's thrilling for the instructor and thrilling for the students, so that hope is still ahead. The distance that Susan traveled from that first class to today, the days and the weeks and the years of the work that she had, is the same distance that every student travels in every MFA program. And it's really just the accumulation of practice and being willing to show up and do what needs to be done. And Susan did that, and she's done it, and she's still doing it. Is that true?
That's true.
I'm just going to keep checking in to make sure you're still doing it. I've been a longtime fan of Susan's North Dakota material, and it was an amazing process to witness the evolution of her novel, All That Lies Beneath. This is a story of land and the people that love it. All That Lies Beneath takes up the controversial subject of fracking and drilling and what it means on a personal level. Told through an ambitious alternating third person, Susan inhabits a cast of unforgettable characters. Fritz, the family patriarch, who has been sidelined by a stroke, his daughter Katrina, who returns to work the land, and Jace, a North Dakota neighbor, resistant to the forces that threaten to destroy a way of place and its people in the name of profit. That Susan makes this world real to us is a testament to her incredible ability to evoke place through lush descriptions and carefully chosen detail, and her deep passion for subtext, all that lies beneath. This is a world Susan knows and loves, and she calls the reader to love it with her, and we do. Please welcome me in joining Susan Wolter Nettell.
Thank you, Sheila, for your kind words. I'm very honored to be here tonight. The creative writing program here, the faculty, the staff, they are wonderful. They are so deeply committed to each and every student. And the students, the writers here, have created a community that is supportive, for encouragement, growth, connection. You know, to be thinking that I'm on the back side of this, I really miss all of this, all of you already. I'm going to talk tonight about All That Lies Beneath. This is the title of my novel. It's the title of my thesis. I'm going to touch upon a few things that I've learned as a writer, and I'm going to share quotes, a few that I've held on to when the doubts were chanting a chorus in my ear, and sometimes those doubts, can set up in my head like a teenage rock band. So, I've been in love with words my entire life. I grew up on a farm. There was no library conveniently nearby. That big structure over there, that was the barn. But I've loved reading, and I read everything. I read my uncle's Louis L'Amour novels. I read my grandmother's Good Housekeeping magazines. I think there were a few true stories that I might have snuck in there on the side. And it's just been a part of my life forever. And as I was thinking about this today, I realized, I don't do a lot of lying, but the first lie I ever told that I remember was about reading. And I told my grandpa I could read 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. And of course, grandpa then said, would you read that to me? And I couldn't read. But I had the rhyme and the rhythm of that book memorized, and I went for it. And I don't know how well I did. Grandpa was probably too kind to challenge me on it. But as I think about this, I realized I was in love with words even at that moment. Because a line of words, a sentence, can open minds to new perspectives. It transports us to new worlds, and it changes our opinions. And in fiction, words lined up one after another on a page can produce laughter or tears on behalf of a character that's only alive in ink. We tell these characters to run, or we tell them, oh, please don't do that, and there's an emotional connection that is magic. And that magic, might be helped with memories, it might be helped with their empathies, but it is triggered through the words on a page. And words on a page can transform. A writer's process is as individual as the writer herself. At some point, we have to come to terms with our challenges, and we have to learn to capitalize on our strengths. And the good news is that no one can tell us we're doing it wrong, and the downside is we all have to figure it out ourselves. One of the most critical lessons I've learned is this connection between reading and writing. And I believe reading is as essential to a writer as ink. Because reading opens our minds to new possibilities. This is true of the content, it's also true of the craft. Intentional, focused reading brings maturity to our writing voices. You learn the craft by reading other people's fiction. And when you've read enough, you come out the other side with your own style. Writers that don't read sound like all other writers. A.S. Byatt. And I believe that to be true. We evolve and grow when we are reading, and this maturity, it shows up on the page. Reading also inspires me. When I'm stuck or blocked, when I'm discouraged or frustrated, I get out a book and I read. Because inevitably, I then go back to the page. And I'm not the only one that this works for. John Gardner writes, it is often helpful when one cannot write to read the fiction of some favorite author. The older writer's dream world and dance of language come bursting into the mind, and one's own capacity for dreaming and playing with words comes unstuck. Dance of language, I just love that phrase. Because to me, when the writing is working, I can feel that rhythm in the words. And I also try to keep good sentences in my head. When I start writing on any given day, I face two hurdles. One, sit down in that chair. Dust bunnies can all of a sudden seem more urgent than 500 pages on a novel. And two is I need to turn off the static of the language around me. Tweets, emails, texts, even conversations are not the language of fiction. We tend to talk in concepts, take out the trash, and in fiction we want to talk in details. I want to know what's in that trash, and I want to know what it smells like. And I start my day with a short study of sentences. I grab a novel or a short story. I set the timer on my phone for 15 minutes, and then I copy every word, every comma, every paragraph break. And at the end of that 15 minutes, when my timer goes off, I finish a sentence or paragraph, and then I turn back to my own work. And that process is enough to channel my thoughts into a fictional mode. It teaches me fiction. And it also gets me in the chair. Because one, it's not hard. I can copy, even if the copy hasn't kicked in, you know, so I sit there. And two, probably more important, it's a gift to myself. I get to spend time reading this other writer. I get to study their words, and I get to allow myself to dance to their language. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about this novel. This novel has floated around for a long time. I started it in novel class, and then I made another run at it in advanced fiction. When I was selected to be part of the Loft Mentor Series, I decided to take a year off from Hamline and write this novel from beginning to end. And so I started doing that again in early September 2014. Can't believe that is 3 years ago. She has talked a little bit about this. When I started the novel, I knew a few things. The setting was northwestern North Dakota in 2013. That's the height of the oil boom. There would be 3 point-of-view protagonists. Fritz, a 71-year-old man who has suffered a stroke, and he has secrets. And all of a sudden his brother shows up because there's oil, and those secrets threaten to erupt. Katrina is a 36-year-old woman, his daughter. She returns home to take over her dad's farm. But returning home also means returning to memories of her mother and her mother's suicide when she was young. And Jace is a 32-year-old farmer and rancher. He agrees to help Katrina, but he's struggling himself with all the oil exploration going on in the land that he loves. So I had a set of problems, but what I didn't know were how these challenges would play out, and I certainly didn't know the climax. Okay, I have a creative side of my brain, but there's also another side, and that side is logical and opinionated and organized, and it gives me problems. Really. I mean, I find it, very disconcerting, terrifying to write in the void of nothing. It's just not a productive place for me as a writer to be. But nevertheless, I really do believe in the process and writing, and what comes out of that process is always more true than what can be determined beforehand. So kind of my way of dealing with that is I kind of give myself a light at the end of the tunnel. And then say, okay, fine, maybe I won't do that in the end, but if I have that out there, I have a target. And that's worked for me. So pretty early on in the process of this novel, I had this scene. It's the last scene. It's not the climax, but it's the last scene. And Fritz and Katrina are standing there. And there was enough, I kind of knew enough about it to say, okay, I have a target. But now I have to get there. A rough draft is inherently an experiment, or rather a series of experiments. Each novel, each piece of writing is a thing with different possibilities that need to be explored. Many of these experiments will fail. But failure is necessary to find those wondrous and magical moments of success. Grant Faulkner. I set a goal of a minimum of 500 words a day, and later I would move it up to 750. Often I would write more than that, but I tried to keep myself accountable to at least that level of production. And I wrote. I bounced between characters, I wrote out a sequence, I wrote scenes in the past, I wrote scenes in the present. After a while, it got really hard for my head, for my brain, my poor wee brain, to keep track of it all. And that organized side of me became really agitated. And then about 7 months in, one day I sat down and I started writing bullet points. And I wrote bullet points kind of whatever scene that I had, and some that I'd kind of started now, because if I did this, then I kind of knew this was going to happen. Anything, and I wrote bullet points, and I sat and I wrote and I wrote and I wrote. And I don't really want to call that an outline, but it was something, and it really actually felt amazing. Because all of a sudden it was like, I don't have to keep track of all of this in my head anymore. And, I also had this feeling like, okay, maybe there's a way out of this. That maybe someday I will have an end. So anyway, then back to writing. And so the pages continued to accumulate, but pretty soon I got to the point where I realized I wasn't going to finish in time to get back to Hamline in the fall. And I made the decision to hold off coming back until I finished the novel. So then I'm approaching the novel's end, and I still didn't know the climax. And I'm getting nervous. And this organized side is, keeping me like on task. And I started to write sequentially just kind of out of the process, because I knew all of this had been building and building. And, you know, I just kept writing, and slowly, and maybe because I'm desperate, and desperation can fuel a lot of words on a page, you know, it worked out. The climax kind of revealed itself, and it revealed itself actually to kind of be two events. One event that strongly influenced the other. So, after 15 months, I had 50 chapters plus a prologue, a handful of miscellaneous scenes that in the end really actually did go nowhere, but a manuscript that weighed in a few pages short of 600. And that is obviously a problem. But that draft and the lessons that I learned was the beginning of my thesis project, and I decided to, you know, concentrate on the first 80 to 100 pages. And so off I went again. Each story arises from its own unconscious rules written in drafts, from a story that tells itself. Inspired by the muse, the gods, whatever one wishes to call, imagination, inspiration, and then the writer discovers and shapes those rules as she discovers how to craft her story in a conscious way. The writer takes what she discovers spontaneously and crafts it to look as if she knew exactly what she was doing all along. That's the essence of craft, the difference between an apprentice and a journeyman writer, Lex Wolter. So that's what I set out to do, hoping things were going to get easier. But I discovered the issues had changed, but the process was not easier. Now the focus wasn't generating, but it was culling this manuscript down to something that was manageable. Because writing is a matter of faith in just so many ways. Faith that you'll find the story, faith that the writing will speak to somebody, faith that even if you get it done, that it will find a place in the world. And when that faith dissipates, you kind of get terror. At least I do. And a manuscript that refuses to come together is terrifying. Okay, between Thesis 1 and Thesis 2, I thought I had a pretty simple task: rewrite Katrina's opening scene. And that job sent me into months of torment. I wrote in circles, always coming back to where I started from, which I'd already determined was a bad place. You know, I'd try new tactics, I'd start in new places, and everything would wither just from a lack of energy. In the midst of my despair, I read an interview with George Saunders where he addressed an audience member's question about dealing with writer's block that I really love. The only frank advice I can offer would be that maybe you could say to yourself that the obstacle is part of it. It's not that you're the one person who doesn't understand story craft. That block is often the story going, I'm not enough yet. Can you help me expand? It takes a certain amount of patience, maybe a little sense of humor, to acknowledge that this is happening and that it's all right. It's part of the process rather than trauma. No use in simply blaming yourself for doing it wrong. That quote got me through a lot of bad days. In the end, I became much closer to my character, Katrina, and I understood her better. I also learned that all those drafts were part of the process. I had to write draft A before I could write draft B, and only then could I conceive of draft C. I'm not smart enough or talented enough to go from A to C. I just had too much to learn on that journey. And finally, I became comfortable with the notion that the issues I was tackling were mine to solve. Writing groups and instructors could point to concerns, but it was up to me to figure it out, and I was comfortable with that. And all of a sudden I realized that this is the issue that professional writers face all the time. It never gets easier, and a writer who thinks it should is involved in a dangerous self-deception. Because you know more and are more apt to see more of the possibilities in each line or gesture, the task becomes all that much more difficult. And the heavy doubts never go away. Better make friends with them now, because they really won't ever go away. Richard Bosch. I had a truckload of heavy doubts. My subject is too big. Who am I to think I can pull this off? And the prose isn't working. When I was writing the first draft, I had to learn to let go of perfect prose to get to the end. In Thesis, that prose critic came roaring back. My novel deals with farming, oil exploration, stroke recovery, and suicide, a substantive list of which I am not an expert. At times I'm terrified I won't get it right. And there's the political terror of this novel, the hotly debated topic of oil exploration. Conservationists and drillers, mudloggers, politicians, people who live there, people who don't, all have firmly entrenched opinions about oil exploration in the Bakken. And there really are very few easy answers. George Saunders gave me a strategy for dealing with this political terror. So, they're both true at once. Leave it just like that. See how long you can stay in that space where both things are true. You, little mind, don't have to decide. That's a great place to try to be. And for a fiction writer, that's the best place to be. You've put two apparently opposing truths in the air, and you're just letting them hang there, knowing that the real truth is that opposition. This advice doesn't make the topic easy, but it does give me a strategy. Stay specific and factual. I don't expect to change minds. This novel is about living where the answers are not easy, and sometimes that is an uncomfortable place to be. Don't delete the complications. Complications make a great book, Kao Clea Yang. Life is complicated, and that should show up in our fiction. And finally, probably the best way for me to deal with terror is to keep writing. Because when I'm writing, all my thoughts and imagination is on task. Richard Bosch gave some advice to beginning writers, but I think it applies to all of us, no matter the number of hours we've put in at the desk. Try not to worry too much and just keep to the sense of this day's work. One question at the end of the day: did I work? If the answer is yes, no other questions. And no matter how bad or how sloppy it seems to go in a day's session, it's always going well if you're working on it. Just visit it each day. Let it know you're there. Be patient and learn to be quietly stubborn. Lately, I've been working on some short stories that got put aside in the quest for the novel. But soon I will go back to this novel. This story calls me back whenever I've been away, and we're just not done with each other yet. I'm not always patient, but I am certifiably stubborn. For me, the process of writing is a sensory one. As I write, I feel my way through the sentences, the punctuation, and the white spaces on the pages. While the words on the page don't make an audible sound, they do in my mind. The tone, rhythm, and pace pulse in those words as they align. This cadence is founded in all the lectures I've attended, a writing practice, and all the reading I've done over the years. When I write, I'm pursuing the moment when those words lift off the page, when they transform from a story into life. And I'm inviting the reader to hear the wind in her ear, to smell the sage in the landscape, to feel the character's breath on their cheek, and rock to the heartbeat of the words, because therein lies the pulse of art. Thank you.